Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. What you're looking at here is about halfway through the game. This is Global War 1914. If you want to see what happened and how we got to this point, I made a video about 4 or 5 weeks ago. It was called, what was it called? Something to do with camels. Oh, I know, it was called Were You Looking at My Camel? And I was playing against my good friend from Edmonton, Rank Carcass. He was here for holidays, and he also put up a couple of videos of us playing the first half of this game. So if you want to know how we got to this point, how Germany managed to take over just about all of South America, how Spain got to where it is, just go back and look at those videos, and that'll show you how we got here. So what I've been doing since then, like I've been busy all summer, but in the last week or so, I've been finishing painting my my units. I had to paint my armored cars and my my trucks. I was trying to think of a way to put supply trucks into the game, supply trucks and supply depots. And so what I'm doing here, I'm finishing this game by myself, and it's going really slowly because I'm just trying stuff, you know, like I'm just winging it. I'm trying different game mechanics, and just to see, you know, like, is this something that'll work? Is this something interesting? Is this too difficult? Is it too easy? You know what I mean? I'm just there's another year or so before this game gets released, and so there's me and there's a number of other guys who are working on this, guys all over the world, down in the States and over in Europe. And actually my buddy Rank just came on board there, Rank Carcass. Doug's sending him a map, and he's going to work on it as well. So we're all working on it, mostly on our own though. I'm sure Rank will be back, or I'll be going to his place, and we'll compare, you know, what we've been doing and stuff like that. And in the end, you know, we all send our stuff to the same place. We send it to Will, and Will is the guy that fleshes it all out and says, yeah, that's a good idea, or are you kidding me? You know, so that's why I'm just throwing things out at the wall and see if they stick. So like you can see a lot of these supply tokens here. This is me building supply lines. And I did hold a contest there recently and said, and asked you guys for your input, and I got lots of good input and everything, and I did take some of your suggestions. What I'm looking for when it comes to supply is I'm looking to build supply lines. Like, I'm not looking to build up supplies, you know what I mean? Like, you can get supply tokens, kind of like the Oil Wars expansion for 1936. You can build up the tokens, and then you can use those tokens for certain things, right? I'll just move this around so you can look at something else here. So you can use them for certain things. You know, like it would cost you one supply token to move your armies in that turn, and one to move your planes, and one to move your boats, and one, you know, like different supply tokens. I don't want to do that. You know, like I want to get away from having to count things up and stuff like that. I want it a little simpler than that. But the supply rules that come with the game already, the supply rules are identical to the rules in 1936. Basically, you're tracing a supply path for the purposes of Lend-Lease, or perhaps upgrading a unit. I don't know that you would upgrade a unit in this game, but in the 36 game you could. Anyway, you look for supply path for a couple of different reasons. And they're actually pretty good rules and everything, and I'm kind of following those rules, but rather than just, you know, like it's just an easy way of tracing it and everything, what I want to do is I want to manage that supply path, like where you're actually building it, and you're extending it, and you're maintaining it, and you're protecting it, and also that you're making money off it. Like, you look at all this, like Germany has gotten a long ways into Russia here, but they can't run out of supplies, so they've got a supply train moving up there, right? Not a train, but I mean a path of supplies. So where it begins is at cities. Cities are all automatically supply depots, according to me. Okay, this is all what I've come up with. So the round circles are cities, right? Like here's Berlin. So, and a truck would go 2 spaces on normal terrain. Like there's different terrain in this game. There's mountains, there's desert, there's tundra, there's jungle, there's all kinds of terrain. So in some kind of terrain like that, you would only go 1 space. But in normal terrain like this, you would go 2 spaces. And even when you're crossing the river, because we're talking about something behind your lines, right? And so you're not fighting across that river. You're going across on a bridge. So that rivers aren't going to affect you by having to cross them like that. So like here, I can go 2 spaces before I have to have another supply depot, because I can just go through this territory and to this territory, because the trucks can go 2 spaces. Again, from here, I could go there, or I could go here. This is 2 spaces, this is 1 space. And so I'm using these tokens to show supply depots. Now what these represent is the supply within that territory. There's already railroads there, and I assume that you're using the railroads for supply as well, and to move troops and stuff. But, I mean, there's just a railroad going through there. That doesn't mean that the battle is right beside the tracks, right? Or that your troops are right beside the tracks. So you do need trucks to get your supplies out to wherever in that territory you are. And so one of these markers, that represents trucks and any type of infrastructure that you need to get your food, your ammunition, your fuel, all those things to where they're needed. So whether you have a marker or whether you have a truck, it means the same thing. The reason I use trucks is because in the end, they're the ones that move, right? Like if I want to attack this guy, then I've got to take a truck with me or suffer a -1 penalty for everyone in the zone that's attacking. So what a truck does is it means that everybody would attack normally. And this game is all about modifying, right? This global war game. It's all about modifying your dice. If you're on a mountain, or if you're crossing a river, or any kind of terrain or city or whatever, fortifications, then you're modifying your dice. And this here, if you've got supply, then that means you don't have to modify your dice. That means that your dice are good. You just use them at face value. Whether you're in a mountain and you have to modify them already, or moving into a city or whatever. This just means you don't suffer a further penalty by not having them. And that's on attack and defense. And the other thing about these is, there isn't a lot of money in this game. Like the Ottoman Empire here, for instance, they only get 10 IPP. So where are you going to get the money to buy these things, right? I mean, you would much rather buy dudes or armored cars or artillery than you would want to buy supply. And so what I'm doing is I'm making these worth money as well. So like here, let's just count these up for these guys. You got 1, 2, 3. There's a truck 4. There's a truck 5. There's a truck 6. So they've got 6 of them. So cut that in half, because I'm making them worth a half an IPP each, and so that's 3. So they get 3 IPP for their supply chain. Because they're going to need that in order to build the supply chain, right? Like if you put them down early in the game, like you'll want to do when you're expanding, then you'll have lots of time to recoup that money. Like you buy 2 of these, and that's $6, right? But then for 2 of them, you'll get 1 back each turn. It'll take 6 turns to pay for itself. So what I did in this game is I threw down a bunch of markers, because I didn't start the game like that. With everybody already spread out. The Germans most of the way in Russia and things like that. All of a sudden they've got no supply. There's new rules or something. So I threw down a bunch of markers and a bunch of trucks on the board. I don't know that I did it fairly or properly or whatever, but I just built supply lines for everybody in the game. I think also what would be a good idea if you were going to go this way or if I was going to go this way again, and I was starting at the beginning of the game, I might start with a few tokens or trucks or whatever, whether they're specified to be in this territory or this territory or whatever, or if you just get, you know, a number of supply tokens or trucks and said put them wherever you want. I don't know, you know, like I said, I'm just playing around here, right? And so that's what I'm doing, is that's what I would do, I think, if I was to play this again and start it from the beginning. Now, that's land supply, where you go as far as a truck can go. As far as going across the oceans and stuff, first of all, your boats, they're already supplied. You wouldn't leave port without enough fuel to get where you were planning to go, right? You wouldn't leave without the food that you needed or the bullets that you needed. So I'm just assuming that as are the rules in the supply rules on HBG, that boats are already supplied. You don't have to worry about building supply lines for boats. Now, building a supply line across the water, like for instance, there are no cities down in Africa. So how would you get a supply line down there? I laid it out so that I could show you what I'm thinking about. And I don't know if this is too complicated or not complicated enough or whatever, like I said. But what I'm going to do is, like, you would go from port to port. But I don't like in the normal global war, you could go as far as you wanted, right, to create a supply path. I want to manage the supplies a little closer than that. So I want you to have to go only as far as you can reach, right? Like, I mean, to get supplies from England here all the way to Australia, I mean, that would take a long time, right? The food would be spoiled by then. So I want you to have to stop at ports and everything. I want you to have to create a supply line on the way there. So here, like, you have like these blue naval bases and the white naval bases. On the blue, they allow you to go one space further. The white ones don't allow you to go one space further, and that's just like a naval base in the previous versions of Global War and in Axis and Allies. They allow your boats to go one extra space. So what I'm saying is that your supply ships go two spaces, just like a troop transport would, but then these can extend you by one. So let's just look at this supply line going down to Cairo there. We're going to go down through South Africa. Like, you could also go through the Mediterranean, but I'm going to show you how you can do it going down to Cairo down there. So you would start here, and you've got this base here, and you could go 1, that's what I put these arrows on here for, 2, 3, and then you go here, and you see that there's another blue base there, right? In Gibraltar. There's another, it's actually a dockyard. It's a major dockyard. So that'll extend your movement by 1 for your boats. So then, and this is all in the same turn. You just got to make sure that you can make it. Like, I don't want you to sail all the way down here without touching anything, right? So that's 3 spaces to there, and then you get extended by 1 again. Or there's a major naval base there. If you, I don't know, maybe they meant for this one to be in this side, but Britain also has one here. So you go to there, and then you go 1, 2, 3, and you can go into this base. This is a British territory here that they've held. And so, but this is only white, so you can only go 2 spaces from here. So there's 1, 2, and there's a base there. So you can enter where there's a base, right? So there you go. They're supplied down to here, and they did have a supply token here. So then there's no weird terrain here. So you go 1, 2. They had to put another one, and then 1, 2. There's another one. There's a truck over here, so this territory is supplied as well. So then there's they just went to the next one here, another one, and then 1, 2, and then there's a truck up here. And a truck over here. But anyway, that's building a supply line all the way up to Cairo without going through here. Like, you could have gone through here as well. It's just that when I started building that, the Ottoman Empire owned Cairo. And so I was coming down here and supplying and moving up here. And that's why my supply line went up here through there. Plus, when you're doing that, of course, you're building more tokens, right? And then the more tokens you have, the more money you get, right? So you probably, over time, especially early in the game, want to put down as many tokens as you could in order to build up your supply. So that's how my supply works, and I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea. I'm just playing around with it. So what else have we got here? Let me show you some of the mechanics here for the Western Front here. Now, if you watch that video that Rank and I made, our videos from there, then you know that there are such thing as a trench line. So if you have 6 or more infantry class units in a territory, then that means that the units here are in a trench. Like I have, what is it? I think 8 infantry and a militia here. So there's more than 6 there. So that means these guys are all entrenched here. One of the things that does is that it means that if you were going to attack that, then you would only be able to attack it for 1 turn. The most you could attack anybody in this game is for 3 turns. But when you're attacking somebody that's entrenched, you can only attack them for 1 turn. If you're attacking into a mountain, you can only attack it for 1 turn. Or a desert, then it's only 1 turn. But anyway, and this was a city as well, so that you probably would only been able to do it for 1 turn anyway. But let me show you what I did there. Like it's Britain's turn, or I just finished Britain's turn in here, and I wanted to take a break and make a video. There's people on Facebook have been wanting to see a video about what I'm doing, so I stopped to make a video. I just had a big battle here between these guys and these guys, and there's still some left, but there's a lot less left here than would be if I hadn't tried a new dynamic, a new game mechanic in this game. And let me show you how it works there. Like I'll show you where the battle was there. This is where the British player was in Belgium here, and they were attacking Western Germany over here. And you can see there's a river that is in between. Like the river, the British would have had to have crossed the river. So the British were going to have to go down -1 to get there, right? There was no doubt. Even though there's no roundel here, you go from roundel to roundel. I assume that it would have been somewhere in the middle here. But they had to cross the river. If the river had been on this side of the border, then they wouldn't have had to cross the river. Even though they crossed it, it's said to be behind their line, and so there would have been bridges there. But because they had to go across the river, that means they had to fight across the river. So already they're going to be down 1. Now, it's difficult to attack in this game, right? This is about what it looked like. Something like this. Like you seen what it shook out as. So I think there was about 11 infantry for the Germans and 5 artillery, 1 tank and 1 fighter. And they also had a supply truck there. And these don't take part in battle. They have 0 attack and defense value. Same with the British. They both had supply trucks, so they weren't going to be modified. Then the British had a fighter. I think it was 14 infantry, 5 artillery, and 2 tanks. Now this isn't a very good attack for the British, especially since they have to go across the water, right? But I did it anyway because Great Britain has a lot of units over there. And the Americans had just come across the water there. They were allowed to bring 10 units to Europe. And the French are doing well. There's no chance of the British getting in on their capital, or the Germans attacking Paris anymore. Early in the game, Rank almost took out Paris there, but Paris was able to hold. Now, like Germany, they're getting behind, right? They've spent a lot of resources going after Russia out there, and so they're being outspent big time on the Western Front there. And so that's what I wanted to do. They had a bunch of units here, like the ones that I just showed you on the battle board were all here, right? So they're able to come down here and into here, you know what I mean? Keep supplying and keep supplying and keep supplying. And the British units, they hadn't done anything except for build up and build up and build up, and hadn't done anything. That's the only territory they could take. So they wanted to attack and to try to get some of those German units off. And as you can see, this is what the Germans had left. They only had 4 infantry left, and they still had the rest of the stuff that they started with, the 5 artillery and the tank and the fighter. During the dogfights, nothing happened there. So what we were planning on doing at HBG when we were playtesting was that we weren't sure what to do with tanks, right? Like, we knew that they were movement of 2 and attack 5 and defense 5 and the cost 5, but we didn't know how we would incorporate them into the dynamic, right? And so it was suggested, and we were going to run with it, that you could pair a tank with either an artillery or an infantry to go on a second round of attacks, right? But the problem with that, and I thought so at the time, and like it never sat well with me. So you can imagine, like, say I only get, let's say I even get 5 guys off here, which would be a lot in the first round, right? Well, then I've got 2 tanks and 2 dudes going in on the second round, right? Against all of these guys. Now, who do you think's going to win that fight, right? Like, that's just suicide going in there like that. And nobody would do that, right? I mean, in real battle, nobody would do that. And these guys, they would never sit out there, well, I'll see you guys later. You've only got 2 tanks, so, we're not allowed to go anywhere. Like, this just wouldn't happen, right? And so I've been studying a lot on World War I because I knew a lot about World War II, but I didn't know a lot about World War I. But because of this game and wanting to help build the game, I've been watching a lot of documentaries and reading a lot on World War II. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the 100-Day Offensive. What it was on the Western Front there. Let's just go over to the thing here. It was on the Western Front. And so when World War I started, it was they even though there was more firepower than they'd ever had in war, they still didn't know how to fight any differently than what they did, right? They just fire the artillery, now stop the artillery, we're going to run forward with the troops, but now there's machine guns, and so they were just mowed down. So they had to build trenches, right? Because otherwise they would have just gotten wasted. You can't just run towards machine guns. And they tried it in the beginning, and that was just an awful casualty rate. And so they built trenches, and then those trenches didn't move for 4 years. Like, if you moved a mile, that would be amazing. You know what I mean? You'd kill 50,000 men on both sides just trying to move a mile on from the trench line. You take over and it wasn't just one trench against one trench, like there was a series of trenches, and there was tunnels and everything, right? But basically what they were doing was they were fighting war as war had always been fought, like it would have been fought in the days of Napoleon. You know what I mean? It was it was the old way of fighting. And then Germany had an offensive in 1918, very early in 1918, and then of course that didn't work because it was the same as always. But then the hierarchy in the Allied army, they had this guy, this general from the Anzac army. His name was John Monash, and he was just an amazing, meticulous planner, for planning everything, you know what I mean? So what he did, also he worked with a guy, a Canadian general named Arthur Currie. The two of them sat down and they planned out a meticulous attack, right down to the very last detail, and it all hinged on timing and everything. And they didn't look for the weakest spot in the German line. You know what I mean? It was called the Hindenburg line. What they did was they went and they found the hardest place to possibly attack, and they threw everything at it. I mean, everything, and the kitchen sink. They did something that was never tried before. They used a lot of tanks. They used a rolling artillery barrage. And they had the troops following in behind the tanks, and they had air superiority by that time. Air superiority So they had 5 times more planes than the Germans did. Now, planes in World War One didn't work the same as they did in World War Two. They could dogfight after a few years, but really, I mean, that's not really going to make or break either army, right? You're just killing one guy basically. Really, what the planes were good for was for taking pictures. They'd fly over enemy lines, and they were mostly looking for artillery. Artillery was by far the largest casualty producer in World War One. It was from artillery that a lot of soldiers died, right? And so they would be looking for the other artillery batteries. They'd be taking pictures of the ground and then taking them back to their own side. And they developed those pictures really quickly and put them on a topographical map and say, okay, now this is where their artillery is. Now we'll shoot. But what they did in this 100 days offensive, it was the last 100 days of the war, and it actually was 95 days, but it's referred to as the 100 days offensive, was they had a rolling artillery barrage. So the artillery started it off, and they, let's just look over here at the Western Front. So they just started pounding the Germans with shells. And this, there was 3 kilometers before you even got to the Hindenburg line. It started in a place called Amiens, and so that was the first place that they attacked was Amiens. And they used a total war to do it. They used the planes to sea, and they used the artillery, a rolling artillery barrage. So what happened was they would attack the front lines of the Germans with the artillery, while the infantry was ready to go, and then the artillery would reset, and then they'd go a couple of 100 yards further as the infantry and the tanks moved up. And it had to be timed just right, otherwise you'd be bombing your own guys, right? And so the artillery stayed just ahead of the advancing soldiers, and they were able to get a surprisingly easy victory at Amiens. And so they thought, wow, this is great, now we can rest, right? I'm talking about the soldiers. One thing I want to mention about that, though, was another thing they had to do when they did this was they had to hide the Canadians, because wherever the Canadians went along that line, the Germans knew that that's where the attack was going to come, because the Canadians were nuts back in World War One. Like, they were just berserkers, right? They were always the first ones to go in, and so the Germans always knew where the attack was going to come. That's where the Canadians were, right? And that they would see that with their planes, and they'd say, yeah, the Canadians are down there. So they moved their army down there because they knew that that was going to happen. So when these guys were doing their planning, this Monash and Curry, what they did was in broad daylight, they loaded up the Canadians in trucks, right, the Canadian forces, and they shipped them north. And they made sure that the German planes could see them, right? And they shipped them all north, so then Germany kind of shifted their line a bit north, right? And then for the next 3 days, only at night, the Canadians had to sneak back. Like, they hid during the day, and they snuck back at night. And they had to do it really quietly, so the Germans would never know where the attack was coming. And so they snuck back they were just outside of, where was that? Amiens. And then that's when the attack happened. So the artillery and then the Canadian and the Anzac troops, they were the first ones to go because they were pretty nuts too, right? And then everybody else behind them, right? The French and the British and the Americans. So then they thought, okay, this is great. Like, we've made it further today than we've gotten in a long time. So now we've earned a break, because that's the way it worked, right? You take a little bit and then you trench, and then you just sit there for the next 6 months, right? But that's not what these guys wanted to do. They said, like, the next day they said, okay, you guys ready to go? What do you mean, are we ready to go? We just fought yesterday, right? No, you're going again. And so they do it again, and then they did it again, and they did it again, and they just kept doing it. Like, they wouldn't stop, and the troops were getting tired, and they were getting pissed off because, I'm lucky to still be alive, and you want me to attack them again? But they just kept doing it until they broke through the Hindenburg line, and there was a town there where they were attacking. There was a reason why they went there. It was a town of Cambrai, I think it was called. And so this was the nerve center of the German army on the Western Front. I think it was still in France. I'm not sure. It might have been in Belgium. And so once they took that town, that was it. They cut the Hindenburg line in half. They knocked out their communications and their infrastructure and everything. Like everything flowed through Cambrai and then out to the rest of the Hindenburg line. And boom, the Germans surrendered. Like that was it. They had enough. But anyway, that was the birth of modern warfare. That's still basically how war is fought today. When Germany attacked France in World War II, like they'd learned the lessons of what happened to them, right? Whereas the Allies kind of forgot it, like they'd won and they were all, like, I'm sick of war, let's go home, let's not talk about it, But the Germans, they were pissed off because, the Treaty of Versailles didn't treat them very well, right? The Allies wanted reparations big time against Germany especially, right? And so that never sat well with the Germans, and having learned that lesson of how they do that, well, when they went back after France and Poland and, like the Lightning War, they did basically the same thing, except for the equipment was much better, right? We're not talking about these old little tanks here. We're talking about Panzers and, and eventually Tigers and stuff. And so that's how modern warfare was born, was by these two guys, this Monash and Curry guys. And they don't really get credit for that. Like the leader of the army, I think it was a French guy on the Western Front, was Fuchs or something like that. Like everybody, Fuchs did this and that. And really what he did was listen to these two guys, right? These two guys were the ones that put this plan together. And they didn't just say, let's do this. I mean, they were meticulous. Like, we have to be here at this point in time. We have to be here at this point in time. All the way down, like the whole thing was planned, right down to the last minute, right? And anyway, that's how they did it. So what I want to do then, for a dynamic, instead of what I showed you before there, where you pair one with a tank, right, and then you go in there on a suicide run, which you're never going to do. If you're going against an entrenchment, so you're only allowed one attack. If you go with all the different elements, like you go with tanks, you go with artillery, you go with infantry, and you have at least one plane, that means that you have combined forces. I don't know what I'd call it, but combined forces, just like they did in the 100-day offensive. And then if you still have all of these things on the second round, like if this plane takes this plane out, then you don't have combined forces anymore. So you wouldn't be able to go on the second round, right? But if this plane survives, let's say that you lose 5 infantry on that first round, and these guys lose 5 infantry on the first round, well then you can keep going. Here, I'm just going to get a different infantry for that one. He keeps wanting to fall off there. Okay. So then, because you still have all 4 elements here, then you can go a second turn. So then you would go again. Now remember, in the first round there, because they had to cross that river, that wasn't a very good attack, right? So really what you wanted to do was get to that second and third round, right? So second round you go again, and now these guys with their artillery, they can pair with the infantry because they're on offense. These guys don't pair with the infantry because they're on defense. So now you've started to get the advantage on these guys, right? And so like you take off more of them, right? And let's say after the second round, let's say that you had to lose all your infantry, right? But then you say, well, no, I want to keep at least 1 infantry and lose 1 of my artillery, because then I can go for another round. You know what I mean? Even though the artillery is worth more than the infantry, you could choose to do that. Or you could choose to take a tank off instead, right? And then go after these guys. But I wouldn't do that if these guys were still really strong and these guys were much weaker. I'd stop after 2 turns, right? But if I really wanted to go again, I'd sacrifice an artillery rather than an infantry in order to keep going. So you could go up to 3 rounds like this if you have combined arms, just like they did in the 100-day offensive to end World War I. That's how the war ended, was that right there, by using that tactic. So that's what I want to do. And I'm going to pass that along to them. I did that already. That's what I did on that fight there. I'll show you what's left now that I've explained it. I didn't modify the rolls there when I was over there, but I had to modify them for going across the river and then modify them back. But like when they were sitting on the board over there. But I did do all that when I was fighting this fight. So these guys only had 1 infantry left. They didn't lose any of their artillery. They didn't lose any of their tanks. They didn't lose their fighter, but they only had 1 infantry left. But they were able to bring across 5 infantry because I was able to build one here for an extra $1. I was able to walk one across this line here, and then I have 3 transports over here. So I brought 4 over from the transports, plus an artillery and a tank. So now I have 3 tanks over there and 6 artillery. So that's how I got to that point from there. But these guys, you can see they're much weaker now, right? Like they have only 4 infantry left. Instead, whereas before I think they had 11 or 12. I think it was actually 12. I only had 11 on the board over there, but I think it was 12. So they were good at like there's a French thing here, and there's a British one here, and then there's these guys who they were resupplying, right? So this that being able to do that was able to make some headway. Otherwise, like it just kept getting more and more crowded over here, right? Being able to only attack once and having to attack across a river, and you know, like it's like you were never going to get there, right? Actually, I think I'm 1 short here. I'm sure that I had 5 artillery there. There we go. It just happened not long before I started the video, so that's how I remember that it was like that. And then I went and I finished the British turn off. Things are not looking good for the Ottomans now because the British are making their way up to the Ottomans. It was just 2 turns ago the Ottomans had Cairo, which meant the British were taking a penalty of 5 IPP for not owning the Suez Canal. But they get a lot more money than the Ottomans, right? And one of the other things is too, like they were coming up from India over there, and it seems to me that this territory should be broke up a little bit. So that's something I'm going to recommend as well, because like they could go from here, right, on a boat, and all of a sudden, like this is where I'm putting the infantry. They're way the hell up there, right? So I think that there should be a break off here. Like there's a territory here, but you set guys down here, that's the same as having them right here, right? And so that I was easily able to get a lot of guys up here. So I think cutting this off here would be a good idea. Making that Yemen or something, I don't know what's supposed to go there, but, or no, I guess Yemen's on the other side. But making that into some other territory, breaking it up, might be a good idea to help out on the Ottomans there. But the Ottomans, like they can't really expand anymore because the British have more money and more resources, and so what they want to do is you defend a lot better than you attack, and especially since Turkey is all mountains, right? So it would be tough to take the Turks out of there, but you could do it over time, right? The Austrians haven't had much to do in this game. Like they've gone after Russia up here, but they couldn't do it too much because they don't get much money either, right? And so, like I think they should get a little more money than what they do, right? So basically, what they're doing now is it's them against the Italians here. That's about it, and they're helping out with the Russians. And then it's Germany by itself in the Western Front. And the seas belong to the Allies. With Asia, there hasn't been a whole lot going. In fact, there's been nothing going on in Asia. Like early in the game, the Allies make a choice whether to take China or Japan, and they took Japan. But what does Japan do? I mean, they do nothing. They're not allowed to do anything. They're allowed to build stuff. You know, they get half their income and they can build stuff, and they can take. Like they took this German territory over here, the Marshall Islands, but that's all they're allowed to do. They're not allowed to, you know, they're on America's side, so they wouldn't attack America, and They're not going to attack India because they're on their side, and it looks to me like in the rules that China is going to probably go to the Allies as well. The Americans get 3 recruitment rules for the Allies, and 3 in 1917 for China. And so, without a war going on between China and Japan, there really isn't much to do over here. Like it seems to me that one side, I could be reading the rules wrong. Like the rules are in a very rudimentary form as the map is right now. There's a lot of just notes and things like that, right? So I might not be reading things properly, but it seems to me that there'd be more to do here if these guys were at war. Maybe more research, I'll do a bit more on that, and as I'm sure everybody else will. But we're trying to make this into a global game, even though it wasn't really a global war. There is a dynamic in the game about random events, and so we'd like to get some more random events scripted in Asia, but still that's not going to provide a huge war like what's going on in Europe right now, right? Like it's full-blown war right from the beginning of this game. Not like 36 where it takes a couple of years to get into the war. But we've talked about that too. We talked about, well, what if we started the game in 1912 or 1913 or something, so you're building up before you go to war. And that could be something that might happen as well. We don't know yet. It is kind of neat though that you can get territories like this, so like bringing South America into the war. The Allies haven't bothered doing anything about that down there because it really doesn't hurt them too much. It's just a couple of dollars that the French or the Germans get. But I think the Americans, once they enter the war, and they should be there in another turn or two, once the Americans are in it full time, then that might be what they do. Is they, with Allies doing pretty well in Europe, they might just come down here and wipe out the Germans in South America down there. So anyway, I don't know that there's much more to tell you here about what's going on. There was a chance that Italy could go to the Central Powers, but it didn't. Like you do a dice roll at a certain point in time, and the dice roll is weighted towards the Allies, just as in history, because they went to the Allies. So so there's a weighted dice roll, and you can weight it even more or less depending on what's going on around here. There's a couple of things you can do, and but it's not that easy to do it right. So Italy came down on the side of the Allies, and I don't know. I think more needs to be done to the game in order to balance it, because even though it's only halfway through the game, the Allies are starting to take over, and they have more money. I haven't gotten to a point where the Russians are having a revolution yet, so that might help, because then without the Germans having to go towards Russia, then they can put all they have going towards them over there, right? And that's going to happen, I think, in this year. I've just gotten to the spring of 1917 here, and I think it's this year that the Russian Revolution happens. I did read up about it there a bit, but I'm going to have to read some more to find out exactly how you do it. I know you roll to get a 12, and you modify that roll with the number of cities that have been taken out, and the number of territories that are worth $1. The map is going to change a lot too, though. Like there's way too many territories in here. It just takes too long to get over here. So we're going to have to change the map. Like this could be 1 territory instead of 2, right? This could be 1 territory instead of 2. We could change it so that there's not so many territories that you have to go through to get there. I think that'll help balance the game a bit. And we'll have to do a bit more work on that as well, right? And it could come down to what the opening setups are and things like that, making sure that the Central Powers have more money or something, right? But anyway, it's a long ways off. But there's lots of guys that love playing these games, and good players too. I played them when we were down there. Some really good players, and they're all really interested in this, and they're all working hard on this and on 1936 to get it ready to go. So I think that when we're done, this is going to be a good game. Anyway, that's what it looks like for now. I'm going to keep playing, and I'll put out another video when I'm done. You know what? I tell you what, let's just grab some here. How about a pack of World War I coasters? Like you see all the coasters that are up there, and the ones that are down here, except for the Japanese one. That's a World War II coaster. That, and these supply tokens. These are supply tokens that have numbers on them, so that you could do some kind of supply, and you could add them up or whatever. You could do them like I'm doing them, make you up your own rules or whatever. Let's give that prize away, okay? Just make any comment you want, but tell me that you want to be in on the prize, okay? So I'm going to cut this video off here, and good luck to you in the contest. Anyway, that's all I got for you here, so take care everyone. General Hand Grenade out.